As many of you know, Cuba has emerged as a global leader of urban agriculture since the 90s. So we'll be hearing about how it developed, lessons we can take from the Cuban experience. So first I'd like to thank the Housing Services Corporation for proposing the session and inviting two local guest experts, Marcela Fresolon and Larry O'Connor. Did I pronounce that right?
Fresolon, yeah.
Marcela is the Director of Housing at Evangeline Hall, and she's worked in Latin America and Canada as an educator and community developer. She directs her attention to the interconnected and systemic issues that deter social justice and equitable treatment for many marginalized communities. Food security is her particular passion, and she brings this to all the places where she works. Larry Connor is the Vice President of the Canadian National Exhibition, CNE, as many of us know it, Chair of the Agriculture Horticulture Committee. With 20 years of elected public life and now a retired politician, Larry has gained a keen understanding of community development, and he's sitting over there in the yellow shirt. So an amazing thing happened just before the summit start. We got confirmation that we're being joined by two Cuban leaders of urban agriculture that are sitting right here with us. It's a special honor for me to introduce you to Miguel and Isis Celcines, here direct from the world-renowned organoponico Vivero a la Mar in Havana. And I should also introduce Alvaro.
I'm Alvaro Venturelli. I'm just the translator today. I did work for a few years, volunteer work with Food Share. I have traveled to Cuba and the Farmer to Farmer program and seen firsthand a lot of the work that they're doing there, and it's pretty incredible, but I'm a translator.
Thank you, Alvaro. And I'm Mary from Food Share. But most importantly, we have Miguel Celcines Lopez, who has been described as a farmer of the 21st century, a Cuban John Wayne with a 6-foot tall frame and stylish cowboy hat that he normally wears, but he doesn't have now, but we'll make sure that he gets one before he leaves. His background is far from being John Wayne, though. He's an agronomist by profession and was with the Ministry of Agriculture in Cuba for 20 years before initiating the cooperative urban farm, Organoponico, Vivero a la Mar, in a suburb of Havana where he lives. As a founding member and president of the internationally renowned and most celebrated urban farm in Cuba, Miguel's experience teaches and inspires people from around the globe about the possibilities of urban agriculture. The Vivero a la Mar provides Miguel not only with a source of income, but spiritual sustenance as well. He has been invited to various international events and exchanges where he has shared his experiences in sustainable urban production. Isis Celcines Milla, if anybody's wondering, yes, she is his daughter, is a leader and long-term member of the cooperative, working there for the past 13 years in all aspects of production and sales. In addition to being a mother of 2 children, she is finishing her degree in agronomy in the Agricultural University of Havana. If this wasn't enough, she also teaches primary school children in her community with the goal of continuing to change the image of farm workers to one where agricultural work is seen as a respected vocation. And on a quick personal note, I just want to say when I went to Organoponico to volunteer there 11 years ago, I wouldn't have imagined that I'd be sitting here with the same people that welcomed me so openly then. It's not only an honor, but really a dream come true that they are here with us in this first Urban Agricultural Summit in Canada. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to all our 4 speakers. And actually, last but not least, Cheryl from Housing Services Corporation will start us off about the tour that they went on.
I guess you all heard that we're having 3 mojitos at the end of this. So I work for Globe, a subsidiary of Housing Services Corporation, and we deliver sustainability initiatives for social housing throughout Ontario. And over the last few years, we've been increasingly asking the questions about how food security impacts the social housing community. We know for sure that poverty and the high cost of housing has a big impact on what's left over to buy food. And the statistics tell a lot of the story. A third of recent immigrant children in Canada go to bed hungry. So we knew that the social housing community in Ontario was getting involved in food security issues and community gardens, and we wanted to figure out a way that we could facilitate and enhance what was going on. And so Housing Services Corporation this past December organized a work study trip to Cuba. On that trip were staff members, board members. Larry O'Connor was a board member, community members, and that's where we met Marcella and the community work that she's doing. And we had an amazing experience in Havana, and we actually got to meet with Gal there, so it's really wonderful that we can host him here now as well. And so I just wanted to put that in context. So this is all about knowledge sharing between Ontario and Cuba, so enjoy the afternoon.
So we probably won't get enough time to talk about everything that we want to talk about. So there's an invitation afterwards. We want to continue the conversation. We can stay behind afterwards. And there's also going to be a chance later after the whole thing is done. There's a stop. Community Food Center is hosting the barbecue. Please do make sure to come down. It starts at 6:30, and Miguel and Isis will be there. So there'll be great food, great people, a lot of other great people from the summit. So please do make sure to come down. It's just on Christie, south of St. Clair, easily accessible by TTC, or driving. All right.
Thank you very much. And pleasure to be here today. I want to tell you, I've been to Cuba a few times. I've been to the islands a few times on vacation. This is the first time I had the opportunity to be there on a study mission. And I want to tell you that it's a whole different perspective when you go there. Little facts on Havana, we know where it is. It's very close, or Cuba, it's very close to Florida, but very large nation. And the geography, while it's quite large, there's transportation issues they have there that are very similar to what we have here, but accentuated by some of the economic situation. So when we go to places like the islands, we usually go as tourists. So you go to the museums, you go to the churches, you take lots of pictures. Sometimes you head to the beaches, you get a little sunburn, the mojitos that we heard about earlier, and you learn a little bit of the culture from a tourist perspective. But when you go into Havana and you go into Cuba, off the usual resorts, that's where you're really getting to meet the Cubans and a little bit of their culture. They're very well known for their ingenuity around transportation. You know, they know about our big old Detroit General Motors vehicles, Ford vehicles, but they create vehicles for everyday use. You can see the pedal car here as an example, delivering water to probably one of the local pumps. And there are all kinds of different types of modes of transportation that are whipped together. And they're very inventive, very creative. And you'll see some of that as we have a little video embedded in here. You'll see some of that as well. And so, you know, in going as part of a study mission, we actually saw a whole different perspective. Things that you normally see, we just take pictures of this normally. This here little gallery as an example, it's in downtown Havana, but it's a community development project. Not only is it just, it's just the artwork that tourists would see, but there's a lot of community development there, and they're very proud of their African heritage. And so there's a little bit of, you can see the artwork there, you can see some of the dances that they perform for us, and it's just incredible. So I want to just show you this little video and give you a little perspective on urban food and where we go from there.
I've been wanting to visit Havana for ages. It doesn't take long to see that it's beautiful, ruined, the sexiest place on this earth. Now that's all rather good, but I've come to find out about an organic revolution that's taking place right across the country that could be a model for the climate change post-oil world. Around a fifth of Cuba's population live in Havana. It's a city that's undoubtedly seductive and exhilarating, but suffering from decades of neglect.
It's a very beautiful city because it's not what I call facelift beauty, manicures and tweaks. It's like a wonderful face on a 70-year-old woman. A lifetime's worth of beauty that's accumulated.
As you travel around the city, you do get a sense of a place frozen in time. Most of the vehicles are pre-1959, lovingly maintained, and they add hugely to the city's charm. But among the decrepit buildings of the old city, there is a strange pairing of decay and healthy growth.
Hola, buenos días.
This might seem an unlikely place for a garden, but actually it's both incredibly interesting and also very typical of what's going on here in Cuba. After the Russians withdrew their economic support at the end of the 80s and the collapse of the Soviet Empire, Cuba was found in a situation where they had no food. They absolutely had to start growing food without oil, without fertilizers, pesticides, and so all across the city, with a communal effort, they turned bits of wasteland into highly productive areas for food and medicine. They had no medicines. And so what you have now is not just a population growing its own food in the middle of a city, but actually one of the most sophisticated, sustainable means of organic growing, of gardening, and medicine on every level in the world. Right in the middle of the crumbling colonial grandeur, a genuine green revolution is taking place in the form of small productive gardens called huertas. These are the equivalent of our allotments, but built on derelict land, and they are the basis of a new gardening culture that is sprouting up all over the city. Alberto's huerta is typical of many in Havana. The building that stood here collapsed, so Alberto and his brother-in-law cleared the site and brought in the soil in wheelbarrows to build the raised beds, even though they didn't own the land.
We took the huerta because we came from a family of farmers. So, when we saw the empty space here, we agreed to grow plants. It was for a hobby and to give produce back to the community.
When the special period began, did that change the way that you gardened?
Well, I had to start more or less inventing because the climate here changed a lot. And because of the need, we had to grow quick growing plants so the community could benefit.
After leaving Alberto, I realized that much of his passion for gardening is driven by his desire to work with and for his local community. His huerta is open and part of the street, which is very different from the private sanctuaries we like to create in our own gardens. The urgent challenge of feeding its 11 million people during the special period meant that the Cuban regime needed to do something on a much larger scale than Alberto's huerta. So kitchen gardens, or organic were set up in the heart of urban communities. One of the largest of these is in the suburb of Alamo, on the outskirts of the city.
To me, this is a sort of vision of heaven. Wonderful vegetables, grown organically. It looks beautiful. People all working together from the community, growing them, earning a living, eating them, caring about it. That's the key. If you want to do something well, you've really got to mean it. This place means it.
Now you might argue that this is not a garden, but there's nothing that goes on here that doesn't happen in every garden or allotment back home. It's just expanded out to meet a dire social need. It's the resourcefulness of Cuban people that have made this organic revolution work. Engineers and bureaucrats go back to the land. Dr. Funes is an agronomist and a key figure in Cuba's green revolution. He's agreed to introduce me to some of the people.
Emilio, ¿cómo estás?
Montidon de la BBC and Emilio.
The engineer is in charge of the gas and diseases control.
And what's his plan?
Applying use liquid and smoke, needing smoke.
Smoke liquid?
Yes, to control pests.
In 3.
Right, so natural pest control.
Miguel Sacinas was one of the 4 men that set up the organic country 10 years ago. He used to work in the office, but now realizes it's an incredibly successful work. He's agreed to show me some of the plants and organic methods that they use here.
This is where we make the compost. The raised beds guarantee drainage.
Ah, the husk from rice. What do you use this for?
We use these to produce compost for seedlings. These beds are what we make the worms.
Beautiful.
One of the most fascinating aspects about our life is that it's for city dwellers and run by local people, which has huge social benefits.
It has had great social impact. It's created jobs with relatively little investment. And on the spiritual side, the city is more beautiful. Many young people used to think agriculture is not cool. And originally, not many people wanted to get involved. Now, most of the people coming to us are young.
Meanwhile, in other countries, there is an exodus from the field to the cities.
But here is the other way around.
All the produce from the garden is sold locally, so it's fresh and wonderfully nutritious. And because the transportation in all directions is measured in meters, not miles, the carbon trail is minimal.
I think this place is a model. I think everything about it is completely wonderful. If we could bring this same attitude to our back gardens back at home, our millions of back gardens and allotments producing wonderful vegetables, just think what that could do to change the whole structure of our approach to food. So it's an inspiration, it's beautiful, and okay, I'm biased, but it's a fabulous garden.
There we go. Now I want to tell you that when we were there, we came back with so much energy, and we found this spice called moringa there, and we started referring to ourselves as the moringa delegation. So we came back the same sort of energy. The way we're going to do our presentation is I'm going to turn it over to Marcella, and we're going to ask a little bit of questions of Miguel and Isis as well, and they will enhance some of what we've got as well for some of our learning. So I think you'll find it interesting. Marcella?
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to go to Cuba. I have worked in Toronto and in other places for many years in the community, and always is a struggle because I manage housing, but of course housing implies much more than a roof over people's heads, and this was the perfect opportunity to see how everything interacts. So when we arrived, we went, it was 7 of us who went, and when we arrived to Havana, I guess we expected that we would work in the urban gardens and get dirty and do that all day long. And actually, our itinerary included daily visits to different organoponics and different forms of urban gardens. But a very important part of the day was exploring Havana, visiting museums, visiting the scale model of the city that is the second largest in the world after New York. We had guest speakers, an urban planner, a professor from the University of Havana who talked about sustainability and sustainable development. And we had dance presentations and meeting with old and new people and young people. At first, some of the members of the group started wondering, what are we doing here? Why are we visiting all these places instead of just getting dirty? And but then it was clear that all these activities were part of a whole. I mean, whole meaning WHO. Of how this whole, in this case the human society, is something else than the sum of its parts. And that the whole cannot be understood solely in terms of its parts and vice versa. There is a common sense appreciation in Cuba of human beings' interdependency with one another and with the environment that is reflected on the way Cuban society works and the economy. This is my appreciation from it. There is a sense of wholeness that is immersed in the socioeconomic structure, and the work of artists, doctors, all types of workers, engineers, farmers, teachers, planners, architects, researchers, all their work is interconnected. It's not just a multidisciplinary approach to things. It's embedded in the society, embedded in the ideology. They are committed to feeding the people and protecting the environment so that future generations of Cubans can also eat and have a clean and healthy area to live. Of course, there is a commitment from the top. It's not just the goodwill of the people who are nice. I mean, there is a commitment from all levels of society, from the individuals, from the society, from the government. José Martí, a 19th century Cuban writer and national hero, and an important figure in Latin American literature, wrote, "People who cannot produce their own food are enslaved people." So maybe we can take that to move forward in Canada, because this was written in the 19th century before any Cold War or anything like that. So I believe that for many countries and organizations, the Cuban experience in agroecology issues, urban agriculture, prevention and response to natural disasters, HIV, and other issues can be a valuable tool in the practices and policies, but always, of course, depending on the circumstances. We can transfer a model in different types of society. We can learn and use it as to see how we can honestly move forward and where is it that we have to push. In terms of, as a housing person who has worked in many community organizations again, we are always aware of how to remove barriers, people's access to food, education, and all that. And Cuba is the best example of how to learn about these issues. 10 days in Cuba was much more than 2 years in Israel. So, thank you. So now,
if you're trying to put down your words in afterwards, so we all kept the log, we all kept the journal. And by the time I was finished kind of typing out my notes, I had 28 pages of typed notes. It was ridiculous because there was so much information. To start off with, what I'd like to do, Marcella, perhaps we can ask Miguel to describe early agriculture before the special period. Can you ask him that question, please?
So we have, we have a slide here. We have a slide here just of the different models of agriculture from the colonial times until now, so you know. And then yes, and oh, okay, yes. Sorry. So Miguel Can you describe the early agriculture before the special period, like historically? Just to give perspective to all this. Whenever he wants to start, because remember.
Yeah, just a little synthesis, he says.
Yes.
Primero que nada, hacer público el agradecimiento de mi hijo y de mi hija por haber tenido el privilegio de
First of all, to the public, I'd like to thank you for being here to give us the privilege of coming and taking part in this.
que los organizadores de este evento nos hayan invitado.
And that the organizers of the event have invited us.
Es un ángulo diferente de lo que estamos acostumbrados a ver.
It's a different angle, a different take on what we're used to seeing.
Aunque al final es común.
Although the end is something we have in common.
Agradecemos a ustedes también su presencia.
I'd like to thank you all for your presence as well.
Tenemos miedo que no se llenara.
We were a little worried that it wasn't going to fill up. It's not just one in Spanish.
Bueno, Cuba, como todas las Antillas, es un país idóneo para la producción de caña de azúcar.
So Cuba, like all of the other Antilles, is a great place for the production of sugar cane.
Los colonizadores europeos no tenían azúcar.
The Spanish colonists did not have sugar.
Durante 400 años se dedicaron
And for 400
producir
years,
azúcar.
they dedicated themselves to producing sugar on the island of Cuba.
Cuba, en los principios del siglo pasado, tenía 2 millones de hectáreas de azúcar.
At the beginning of last century, Cuba had 2 million hectares of sugar.
160 fábricas de azúcar.
160 factories for sugar.
Y dependía en el 70% de las importaciones de comida de los
And was
Estados Unidos.
70% dependent on imported food from the United States.
El más terrible de los monocultivos.
The worst of the monocultures we could have asked for.
Esta situación en los años 60 pasó a otra fase.
In the 1960s, this changed and turned into a different situation.
Hubo un diferendo con los Estados Unidos, quitaron la cuota azucarera y pasamos a vender el azúcar a Europa del Este.
So they lost the quotas of sugar that were going into the United States and were no longer allowed to sell in. So then they transferred their quota. They started growing for Eastern Europe.
Entonces, en vez de venir los alimentos desde Estados Unidos, empezaron a venir de la Unión Soviética.
And so then instead of our foodstuffs arriving from the United States, they started arriving from the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe.
No había seguridad alimentaria.
There was no food security.
Por supuesto, soberanía alimentaria.
And certainly no food sovereignty.
Eso era un gran problema heredado de 400 años de colonia.
And this was a huge problem that we inherited because of 400 years of colonization.
Y seguimos, nuestras exportaciones también andaban alrededor del 80% de producción de azúcar.
And so with Eastern Europe, we were at about 80% of all our exports were going to Eastern Europe.
Había un punto de balance antes de los años, digamos de los 30 a los 50, a los 60, que la agricultura cubana era una agricultura manual, el corte de caña era manual, la alza era manual y todo se hacía.
There was a tipping point at this time before the revolution where everything was done by hand. Everything was done with just manual labor always.
Por eso el 80% de la población cubana en aquellos años vivía en la zona rural.
And so 80% of the Cuban population lived in the rural areas at that time.
Cuando hacemos el cambio de cliente, para decir de alguna manera,
when we changed clients, to say it in a different way,
los soviéticos quisieron hacer en Cuba el ejemplo del desarrollo.
The Soviets wanted to make of Cuba an example of development.
Teníamos más tractores por habitante que Estados Unidos.
We had more tractors per capita than the United States did.
2 millones de toneladas de cereales.
2 million tons of cereals.
1 millón de toneladas de fertilizantes.
1 million tons of fertilizer.
25.000 toneladas de pesticidas.
25,000 tons of pesticides.
Maquinarias, aviones, una cosa.
Equipment, huge machines, airplanes, anything we needed for production.
La revolución verde.
The Green Revolution, Soviet style.
¿Qué pasó? La población rural se fue a la ciudad.
And so the rural population moved into the cities.
Y entonces se invirtió el prisma, 20% en el campo y 20%.
And we reversed the numbers, and suddenly 80% of our people were in the cities and 20% in the country.
De ese 20 que había en el campo, solo el 12 estaba en la agricultura.
Of that 20% that were in the country, el 12 o el 12?
El 12.
Only 12% were actually working in agriculture.
Había mucha productividad, mucha maquinaria.
Huge productivity, lots of mechanization.
De pronto, en aproximadamente 10 meses, eso se derrumbó.
In about 10 months, that all came down.
Cuando se derrumba la economía, o sea, el derrumbe del campo socialista,
The breakdown of the socialist camp,
Cuba se quedó.
Cuba was left without defenses.
Hubo una coyuntura además. Nosotros tenemos buenos precios del azúcar en la Unión Soviética.
And there was another thing as well. We had very good prices for our sugar from the Soviet Union. Too good. The prices were too good, so unrealistic.
Cuando sucede, el azúcar estaba a 4 centavos en el mercado mundial.
And when food was at 4 cents per kilo, per pound on the global market,
y a nosotros nos costaba 10 centavos producir una libra de azúcar.
and it was costing us 10 cents to produce it.
Todo se derrumbó.
Everything came down. The returns from the market were no longer there.
La sociedad cubana sufrió un impacto brutal.
And so the Cuban society suffered a brutal impact from this.
Transporte, por supuesto, petróleo,
Transport, petroleum, fertilizers, we had none of it.
Y la zona rural no tenía personas.
And the rural zones didn't have the people needed in order to do the agriculture.
Entonces, ahora ustedes entienden por qué la agricultura urbana en Cuba es líder en nuestra región.
And so now you understand why urban agriculture in Cuba is one of the world leaders. It's out of necessity.
O producíamos orgánico en la ciudad o nos moríamos de hambre.
We either produced organic food in the cities or we would die of hunger.
Y todo fue una transformación acelerada.
And it was an accelerated transformation.
Ese trabajo que ustedes vieron de la BBC,
the BBC production that you just saw here,
hace alrededor de 7 años.
It's about 7 years ago.
Podemos decir que en este momento hay cerca de 350,000 personas que se dedican como manera de vida.
We can say at this time that there's about 350,000 people who dedicate themselves with their lives to la agricultura, urban agriculture.
Y hay unas 52,000 hectáreas trabajando en la producción.
And there's about 52,000 hectares being produced, 110,000 acres being produced organically in these areas.
Está controlada una producción aproximada de 1.100.000 toneladas por año.
There's about 100 million tons of production coming out of this annually.
Pero hay sectores de este tipo de agricultura que no solamente organopónicos.
100,000. 1,100,000. Spanish is funny with that. Billion and million are mixed.
Estamos hablando de la situación de Cuba, de la agricultura y de estas diferentes etapas. Podemos agregar que en este momento
we're speaking of the different situations that Cuba's been through. So let's just add that at this moment,
el 70% de la agricultura de las tierras cubanas de tierra están en forma de cooperativas.
So 70% of the lands that are being worked in Cuba are cooperatively run.
So, and actually, we've got some questions that are going to lead right into that. So you can just take a look perhaps at the information on the slide, and we'll ask the questions. We have a question for Miguel. It's about the food ration system. There was a food ration system introduced, and of course, as tourists, we think of food rationing as a bad thing, but it was put in place for a very real purpose. So, Miguel, can you explain the ration system that was created for an equitable food distribution system? In Canada, we don't have it. We don't understand the concept, and give us a brief description of it.
El sistema de racionamiento existe para que haya una distribución más justa de productos. ¿Podría describir este sistema? Porque acá no existe ese sistema.
Bueno, el sistema no fue espontáneo.
It wasn't a spontaneous system.
En la década del 60,
in the 60s,
hubo un enfrentamiento muy fuerte.
We had a heavy fight, basically.
Con los Estados Unidos.
A big fight with the United States.
Y buscando un nivel de estabilidad social.
And looking for a certain level of social stability.
Para evitar que los que tenían dinero especularan con los alimentos.
to get out of the problem that the people with money would speculate on all of our food needs,
se decidió centrar los alimentos con el Estado y garantizarle una cuota mínima.
we decided to centralize all of the products in order to be able to guarantee fair access to the food for everybody.
Se pueden pensar, quizás los más jóvenes no sepan, que Cuba desafió.
Maybe some of the younger people don't know, but Cuba essentially
desafió una estructura de Estado.
They challenged
que aún subsiste o que aún existe.
The system of states which is currently still in place.
Y esa fue la primera versión, no era falta de comida, era evitar especulación con la comida.
So that was the first reason we started centrally bringing food together. It was not because we didn't have food, it was to get away from food speculation, raising prices, like we have now.
Por supuesto que esto después jugó un papel más importante en momentos de crisis.
And after, when we had a crisis, then this played a much more important role.
Y hoy juega muy poco papel.
And today it has a much lesser role.
Voy a decir por qué.
I'll tell you why.
El Estado subsidiaba los productos.
The state would subsidize the food products.
No subsidiaba al hombre.
And it would not subsidize the people.
O sea, yo que ganaba mucho dinero, me iban a dar la comida al mismo precio que otra persona.
So although I would make a lot of money, they would still sell me the food at the same price as a poor person, as someone else.
Esa es una tendencia de igualitarismo que es muy peligrosa.
These are some of the tendencies of egalitarianism which are very dangerous.
Esto se está reduciendo la cantidad de productos por la canasta básica.
So this led to a drop in the number of products that we could buy in our basic food box, what you can buy with your weekly dollar. And now we have many products where we are that are now in free commerce to the people of Cuba.
Y el principio es subsidiar al hombre.
And the principle now is to subsidize the people and not the products.
Como toda obra humana, nada es perfecto.
Like all human works, nothing is perfect.
It's interesting when you look at the special period. The fact is, the average need is we probably eat about 3,000, 3,500, maybe a little bit more calories a day. The whole nation island lost an incredible amount of weight. And if public health ever wanted to challenge obesity, it would be through a crisis like this. But I don't think that would be acceptable here.
So when we put this presentation together, we were hoping to give a holistic approach of the history of Cuba and then bring it now, what's happening now and all that. But now we have the honor that they are here and they can talk about all this much better. So do you want to, this one is, Miguel, here there are some, the slides talk about the urgent set of agricultural reforms, the intellectual capital mobilized, 30 years of investment on human capital, of course, was very important in terms of putting the measures into place. So, Miguel, what were some of the government reforms? Oh, sorry.
Okay, the question that Marcelo proposed, she thinks he both Spanish and English. She's twice as smart as I am. So the question that she's about to propose is what were some of the government reforms that were required to allow for different, within agriculture, to allow the shift to happen in food production?
¿Cuáles son las reformas que el gobierno tuvo que implementar para que se puedan desarrollar diferentes sistemas de diferentes tipos de sistemas de agricultura? Que algunos que tengan privado, otros que tengan co-ops.
Huge question.
We're going to run out of time though, Miguel.
Lo que pasa es que entre tantas generaciones
over so many generations
que tenemos aquí,
that we have here,
hay cosas que algunos no van a entender.
There are things that some will not understand.
O sea, la magnitud del enfrentamiento ideológico.
The magnitude of the ideological, you know,
de un país que está solo 90 millas de Estados Unidos.
of going up against a country like the United States.
La inmigración a la Florida.
From immigration to Florida.
los actos no muy amistosos,
the unfriendly acts of a ongoing dirty war,
incluyendo una invasión,
including an invasion,
fue creando una cierta beligerancia permanente.
started creating a certain permanent belligerence.
Creo que los modelos que utilizamos al principio, vuelvo y repito, fueron paternalistas y fueron igualitaristas.
I think that some of the early systems that we used were paternalistic and egalitarian.
Yo no creo que hubiera ningún país antes de los años 90 que viviera mejor que Cuba del tercer mundo.
I don't think that there were any country in the third world leading up to the end of the 90s, before the special period, that lived better than Cuba did.
Y para los filósofos,
for the philosophers amongst you,
Marx dijo que el Estado debía ser dueño de los principales medios de producción.
And so they were, ¿quién dijo?
Marx.
Marx said that the state must be the owner of the methods of production.
Nosotros nos hicimos dueños de todo.
So we became the owners of everything, we the people of Cuba.
Fue un error. Y ahora lo estamos arreglando.
And now we are slowly changing that, we're fixing it.
Pero el tema es de mucha complejidad.
But it's a very complex theme.
Porque parecería ser de sentido común.
Because one would think, that it would just be common sense.
Pero en política, el sentido común
But in
no
politics, there's no such thing.
No sé si
se les pasa bien.
So, algo que querríamos, sorry. From our experience in Cuba, we would like to bring here how we can all work as one. But I'm not talking in just a nice, in a way that doesn't compromise us or anything. But it's how using some of the models that they have in terms of how they work with the different levels of society, how they participate no matter what you are in daycares, in this and that, and how we are all part of the same world. So we had meetings in Cuba with a Grupo Espiral, means Project Spiral. Yeah. So it's a yeah.
Yeah, no, it's too much. There's too much going on. We don't know.
Our guide took us one day to visit, to meet with this grassroots group that is comprised of young professionals, lawyers, teachers, artists. I think there were some scientists, and very young, from 22 to 30 something. And they are dedicated to work with the youth on issues around environmental sustainable development. But their message is much more than to deal with specific issues. It's basically to develop a better human beings that can work in the community, to have an understanding of how to work in the community. They have street theater. They address many issues, but always having discussions as to where are they going to go with this. So I think that's something that I understand in Ontario we do some of that stuff, but how can we include and how can we make sure that we remove barriers? In housing, we work with people, we say, oh yeah, we need more than a roof, we need a community garden, we need a community kitchen, we need some cultural events, but we need to tap in the skills of people. And mean, it cannot be like this thing, somebody else decides what we need to do. So how do we tap in the skills of people? And then the community will be helped. Because basically what we are trying to develop is healthier community. Physically and mentally, emotionally, or spiritually, whatever way you want to address. So, so this type of activity, like the Project Espiral, that they go in the community, into neighborhoods that the kids had a lot of trouble, and they move forward. This is the kind of thing that helps improve the quality of life for the Cubans in their community, and hopefully we can work with some type of understanding like that of how we work with all these interactions that exist among the different disciplines, issues, and of course, again, in Cuba there is an ideology that transmits down, and so then here it will have to be different. I guess it will have to come from the people.
So you see this group here, they did it through music, but multidisciplinary. So really it's community development kind of at its best. And then this next slide, Fuster, he does it from an artist's perspective.
So Fuster, they call him the Picasso of the Caribbean. And so we had the privilege of visiting him at the neighborhood, and you see all his stuff goes. It was a pretty humble neighborhood. I mean, even though the Cuban society, in terms of income, might be more homogeneous than Canada, but still there are areas that I guess they are more humble. And he went to the community. He lives in that area. He's an incredible artist, and with Mosaic, he worked in his whole neighborhood.
So in the far side, you see that blue building. It's actually the clinic. And so it involved the local residents in creating, just sharing his artwork. So
and his house is in between all this. That's part of the house.
It's interesting because it's that whole philosophy that Marcela's talking about.
The whole thing around community gardens, too, I just wanted to say something. That there are all these chemists and engineers and all that are involved in this, and agronomy, but they go, everybody's involved in this. The daycares, the schools, everybody's part, every organization is part of it. So when you go to the daycare, you see they're doing this. There are intergenerational projects. And,
so Dr. Marta actually talked to us a little bit about the sustainability, and it's interesting because all of that language around trying to feed everybody is kind of embedded in it. So we've got a question for Isis, and the question that we're going to ask her is because we want to know how women are involved at the Organopanel at Alamar in comparison to men, and
I'm just framing the situation so they know what's coming.
Yeah,
translate that too.
We want to know what women do there as well. And then I guess maybe the ratio.
So, ¿cuál es el tipo de trabajo que desempeñan las mujeres en el organopónico Alamar? Y la proporción entre hombres y mujeres trabajadores. Y esa proporción, cualquiera fuera, ¿refleja la participación laboral en todo el país? ¿O la cooperativa de Alamar tiene una filosofía y una praxis laboral única?
I'll repeat that once in English, okay? So she can get her head around it. So, how are women included in the workplace at the garden in Alamar compared to men? And the ratio of women to men at Alamar, is it the same in all workplaces? And does the co-op model that the farm that we visited there in Alamar, is it a unique philosophy that they have, or is it common through the country? She didn't get the question in advance.
Bueno, la mujer en la sociedad cubana tiene un rol importantísimo.
Women in Cuban society have a super important role.
Pero en nuestra finca,
but on our farm,
importante.
Super important.
De 162 trabajadores,
162 workers that we have,
42 somos mujeres,
42 are women.
casi todas somos jefas.
We are almost all managers.
La mujer es mejor administradora que el hombre.
A woman is a much better administrator than a man. I'm not supporting him in translation.
La mujer administra la familia, que es una gran cooperativa.
The woman also administers the family, which is a huge cooperation.
Toma menos ron que el hombre, es más leal que el hombre.
Drinks less rum than the man, is more loyal than the man. Sometimes.
Esa frase de que detrás de un gran hombre hay una gran
The
mujer.
phrase that behind every strong woman, there's a strong man, there's a stronger woman,
Es mucha verdad.
it's true.
Si la mujer no hubiera estado, el hombre no era nada.
And if the woman weren't there, the man would be nothing.
Pero así todo existe cierto paternalismo con la mujer.
That said, however, there is some paternalism there, a bit of a macho society still.
Nos ubicamos en actividades no tan fuertes como las que hace el hombre.
We find ourselves in activities and jobs which maybe are not as heavy as the men.
En los puestos que están mujeres tenemos los puntos de venta.
In these positions, we find ourselves at the sales venues,
En la parte también de la economía,
in the economics and in the bookkeeping,
en la parte de los servicios y atención al hombre.
and the service and attention to help and support the men,
Cuando digo al hombre, hablo hombre y mujer.
to help everybody, sorry, to help not just the men.
En la parte de la producción de posturas, tenemos una casa de postura en Cepellón donde se producen 3 millones de posturas al año.
We also have in our area where we produce over 3 million garments in our neighborhood, and the women do this work.
Y hay muchas mujeres trabajando en esto.
And many of the women are working there.
Tenemos también una pequeña agroindustria
We also have agro-industry,
donde trabajan mujeres. Las mujeres casi siempre la cocina nos llama.
where la cocina?
Sí.
So for us as women, the kitchen is always calling us.
Y allí también hay mujeres preparando los condimentos secos.
And there you also have many women elaborating dry food products,
Hacemos condimentos secos, pastas de ajo,
condiments, garlic paste,
pasta de tomate,
tomato paste, what's food processing,
hacemos vinagres,
vinegars,
encurtidos,
pickles.
pickles.
That was one of those funny words, I guess.
Tenemos también como ya saben, producimos de forma orgánica
We also produce organically,
y contamos con un pequeño laboratorio
and we count on a small lab,
rústico
fairly rustic in nature,
donde yo
where I
y otra
and
compañera
another female companion,
nos encargamos de la sanidad vegetal de la
we are in
finca.
charge of the health of the vegetable crops.
Donde además
Where we also reproduce
reproducimos insectos benéficos como las cotorritas.
beneficial insects.
Apoyamos en todo lo que es el monitoreo y observación de las áreas,
We support everything that is the observation and the monitoring of all the garden zones,
ya que la producción de forma orgánica es muy preventiva.
because organic agriculture requires this much more. You have to be very preventive.
Deben de focalizar la situación cuando está.
You have to really understand the situation and the problem as it's beginning, and maybe before.
Si esperas que la plaga te diga estoy aquí,
And if you wait for a plague to tell you, hey, here I am, then it's probably too late.
también trabajamos con el manejo agroecológico
We also work on agroecological management on our farms, and
y una de nuestras principales fortalezas es la biodiversidad.
one of our principal strengths is biodiversity.
En la jungla no existen las plagas
In the jungle, there are no plagues.
Y es producto al balance, el equilibrio que existe a la amplia diversidad.
And it's
que
got
hay
to do
en
with
esta
the
área.
balance that we find from the huge diversity in the forest.
Y eso es lo que hacemos, o lo tratamos de hacer allí, crear unas mini junglas,
And this is what we try to create on our farms, our mini jungles,
y ese es nuestro ejército.
and that is our army.
Las mujeres, además, trabajan mucho en la actividad de rescatar la vocación agrícola en las nuevas generaciones.
Women are also doing much of the work of trying to save and rebuild the capacity to do agriculture in the younger generations.
Trabajamos con niños de las escuelas cercanas.
We work with the children in the local schools.
Tenemos un círculo de interés muy famoso ya hasta a nivel nacional,
We have a circle of interest that is actually quite famous in our area, already national in scope.
donde hasta la televisión ha hecho programas.
Where even television programs come from Quebec and nationally to show what we're doing.
Donde no solamente los enseñamos a producir como lo hacemos,
And where we not only teach them to produce the way we do,
sino también a comer de forma
but
sana.
also to eat healthy.
No sé aquí los niños, pero a los niños
I don't know
a
about
veces
kids here,
no son
but
muy asiduos a comer vegetales.
Children aren't very prone to eat vegetables.
Si es así aquí, allí pasa lo mismo.
It's the same there. It's the same here, same there for kids.
Y entonces logramos hacer como una fiesta cultural, buscamos payasos.
So we managed to have cultural festivals, and we have clowns that we bring in and
Los enseñamos también a reconocer los insectos,
teach them to recognize all of the insects and to understand the world around them better.
de que no son buenos y malos, todos son buenos.
And that there are no good or bad bugs, that they all are good on some level and have a role.
Porque uno depende de otro. El que es malo para una cosa es bueno para el
Because
otro.
one bug depends on the other. So the one bug may be bad for your crops, but it's good for the beneficial insect.
Y además que no piensen solo en la importancia del dinero, de lo material,
We're also really trying to teach them not to think only about the importance of material goods and money,
que piensen más en el éxito que pueden alcanzar ellos
to think more of the successes that they can achieve,
cuidando el medio ambiente
taking care of the environment,
y no en cuánto dinero puedan poner en su bolsillo.
and not just from the perspective of how much money they can put in their pockets.
Y así tenemos una relación entre escuela y finca
And this way we have a great relationship between the schools and the farm,
muy armónica.
which is very harmonious, holistic.
Cuando salgo por las calles, encuentro muchos niños que me dicen, maestra, maestra.
When I go out on the streets and walk the streets around my neighborhood, tons of kids come up and they're like, hello teacher, hello.
Cuando yo llegué a mi cooperativa,
When I arrived to my cooperative,
mi padre ya estaba allí como presidente.
my father was already the president there.
Más tiempo que Chávez.
He says he's been there longer than Chavez. He's no Fidel yet, but Fidel.
Yo en aquel entonces era graduada de telecomunicaciones.
So I was a graduate from in telecommunications,
Llegaba el famoso periodo especial
and the special period was arriving.
y mi padre andaba buscando una vendedora.
And my father was looking for a sales agent.
Le dije, te voy a ayudar a vender, pero esto es una cosa de tránsito.
I said, I'm going to help you sell this, but this is only transitory, not full-time, not permanent.
Pero el semáforo se quedó en rojo y allí me quedé.
But the red light stayed red, and there I am.
He pasado por todos los centros productivos. Él dice que es porque no soy muy buena.
I continue to pass through all of the different production centers that we have. My dad says it's because I'm not that good at it.
Pero pienso que es más bien para que el currículo sea amplio y pueda heredar la finca.
But I think that it's more so that we can create a broader curriculum and so that I can inherit the farm. Farm succession planning. Here, we don't have that much here.
Estoy cursando el quinto año de ingeniero agrónomo.
I'm going into my 5th year as an agronomist in school.
Para el próximo año ya seré ingeniera.
And next year I should be an engineer already.
y disfruto muchísimo lo que hago.
And I love it.
So I just wanted to say something because from what we learned in Cuba from some of the professors there, they said that Alamar, before the farm and all that, people didn't want to, they didn't think that it was a good housing project. So I guess with the farm and with people participating there, it got much more vibrant and people started participating, right? So what we would love to do is to maybe bring it to Ontario, maybe bring them to Ontario, and
bring the discussion back to us, this room here.
and also them.
That slide there, actually, the housing slide, you can see up there. That is actually Alamar. And there's 100,000 people living in Alamar in that housing. So you can see it's quite crowded. There wasn't a lot of services built into it. We learned from our social housing mistakes in the past, and they're discovering that they've made some social housing challenges themselves. And so they've looked at some solutions, and one of the obvious solutions was in the food area of food, and the garden itself. The special period may have been the impetus. They lacked the fertilizer, they lacked the fuel, they didn't have the equipment any longer. They lost the market, they couldn't import. So they created the local food movement there out of the special period. I think that most of the people that have been attending the conference would agree that we need something maybe not that drastic, but somehow or other we need to start a grow local, organic, community garden, community project like this. And I think if you look around the room, a lot of you are probably people like Marcella that are very much involved in that sort of thing now. And really what we'd like to do is offer the opportunity, because we can find the examples, in public health where we know what some of the challenges are. But in poverty, I like this slide here. Just take a look at the life expectancy and the money that's spent on healthcare expenditures. Cuba, Canada. There's lessons to be learned here, and I think the lessons to be learned really are probably in some of the questions that you may have as well. So we would like to offer you the opportunity to ask a few questions, because I think that we're going to learn more by being as interactive as we can. And I'm going to ask the translator, who's translating as I speak, to try to see if we can't get as many questions as we can in the time we have left in this presentation. So we're going to open up the floor to questions, and with the understanding that we're here looking to try to solve some of our fights around organic gardens and urban gardens. Question at the back.
I was just wondering if there were any thoughts on how you would keep this system developed and expand upon your work, building this sort of independent in an interconnected way. Should the political situation change or the state of the environmental
So the question would be, would they want to go back to the system the way it was?
No.
What's the question?
Continue doing connecting people, building gardens, and all these kind of things that someone else might want to persuade you or take over. I don't know what to say, but keep going and do the work.
So the response is that really Cubans don't feel that the government is going to change. They have they may have a commander-in-chief that is totalitarian. They have a very structured governance system in Cuba. One of the things that they don't have is lobbying. When I was there, everybody is allowed the same amount of space in a public zone to lobby for what their platform is for government and to be elected. They feel that there will be very little change in this because they already have a strong governance model.
I guess following up to that, not just like a government change, but I know I'm from the U.S. and the there's movement from the agribusinesses to get around the embargo or end the embargo and flood Cuba with U.S. agricultural products, grain. So do you see effects of that, or do you anticipate having to resist that? Because the U.S. agribusiness corporations are eager to get back and flood with underpriced.
Yeah, they do the same through the Ontario Food Terminal here.
Yo diría que de alguna manera está empezando a pasar.
I would say that it's already starting to happen.
Yo soy de los que pienso que nosotros el embargo nos ha dado mucha independencia.
I think that the embargo has given us great independence.
Hay otros países con una dependencia alimentaria brutal.
Other countries have brutal food insecurity and dependence.
Creo que la filosofía debe ser interrelacionar conocimiento.
So the philosophy should be to interrelate knowledge.
Nosotros recibimos solo en lo que va de año en la finca 22 universidades de Estados Unidos.
We received just in the last year 22 different university delegations from the United States,
incluyendo Harvard.
Including Harvard.
Hay un apetito por dominar esta técnica de producción orgánica.
There is a real appetite for learning how to dominate organic agriculture, these techniques, to learn the techniques.
Y nosotros vivimos al lado de Estados Unidos.
And we live right beside the United States.
No vamos a estar la vida entera fajados.
We're not going to be fajado enojado. We're not going to live our lives angry because of this.
We do.
I would like to hear more about the cooperative movement in Cuba and perhaps from the panel as a whole, what your observations are in terms of whether or not that's an effective model that could be brought back to our type of social system.
Mira,
Well, sorry, I just want to add.
Mira, al triunfo de la revolución,
The triumph of the revolution,
el gobierno nacionalizó las tierras de las transnacionales, o sea,
the government nationalized the corporations' lands.
Y de los terratenientes.
And of the large Cuban landowners as well.
Se quedó con el 70% de la tierra.
It ended up having 70% of the land, the government.
En granjas estatales que funcionaron cuando había muchos recursos.
Large state-run farms that worked very well when we had lots of inputs.
En el año 93, producto del periodo especial,
93 is a product of the special period and the breakdown of the Soviet economy.
Se crearon unas nuevas cooperativas.
We created some new cooperatives.
Y en este momento el 70% de las tierras en Cuba agrícolas están en forma de cooperativas.
And at this moment, 70% of the agrarian lands in Cuba are cooperatively managed.
Se espera que este año, ya lo dijo el Parlamento cubano, salga la ley de cooperativa para todas las esferas de la sociedad.
And that this year, the government in Cuba has decreed that they will come up with a law to enact cooperatives at all levels of Cuban society, not just agriculture.
Nosotros somos presidentes de una cooperativa hace 15 años.
I'm the president of a cooperative for 15 years now.
Y una cooperativa bien manipulada, bien manejada.
A well-managed cooperative
es invulnerable.
Is invulnerable.
Creo que hay mucho todavía que hacer porque hay muchas cooperativas en el mundo que han fracasado también.
I think there's much to do still because there are many cooperatives in the world that have failed.
Y ese es el próximo reto de la sociedad cubana.
And that's the next challenge for Cuban society.
I wanted to say that Canada has a history of cooperative movement back in the farms, and I don't know when, maybe the 19th century or something else, I don't know. And that people are trying to come back, and I mean, there are co-ops in Canada, and there is a strong movement in the East Coast, in Quebec, different places, so those are lessons to be learned and shared with Cuba and with the world. And yes, and we should be working on small scale, not on large scale enterprises or anything like that. And that's the perfect model to work. But of course, it entails that we need to put a lot of work.
Yes, thank you. Might have missed some questions here. There were hands up earlier. Okay, so we'll go back and forth.
Speak up, please.
There's so many people working in Cuba and I'm wondering, here we have probably not very many people know how to grow, so I'm wondering how there's so many people that know how to grow.
Dice que tienen tanta gente trabajando en La Habana, en la agricultura urbana, y que increíble que tienen el conocimiento para hacer este trabajo, pero aquí no tenemos mucha gente. And so you want a guide to how to get there, you mean? Así que cómo podemos nosotros integrar este conocimiento a nuestros jóvenes para que tengamos más gente aquí para hacerlo.
Sí, porque hace falta vocación. Sí.
We need more vocational schools.
Talento.
No vocational school. Call. That people need to have a call for that.
So there has vocación.
Vocación, talento, instrucción.
So yeah. So we need a place.
Y lo más importante es pasión.
And you have to have passion. You have to want to do it. You have to they had to do it.
Eso tiene que ver con el liderazgo.
And that has to do with leadership.
Con las condiciones económicas creadas.
With the economic conditions we live in.
Nada que no sea un buen negocio puede prosperar.
And nothing that is not a good business can succeed.
Nada que no sea un proyecto económico de vida para tu familia.
Nothing that's not an economic project for the success of your family
puede prosperar.
Can prosper.
Pienso que el camino de la agricultura orgánica es largo.
I think that the path of organic agriculture is long.
Y no se trata que los canadienses todos coman productos orgánicos.
And it's not about every Canadian eating organic food.
Sino que empiecen a ver algunos canadienses que digan yo no como productos químicos.
But to start to have Canadians to say, I'm not eating any more chemicals.
Porque es lo mismo que el tabaco.
It's the same as tobacco, alcohol.
Se dice de la droga.
Drugs.
La obesidad mata más gente que el tabaco.
Obesity kills more people than tobacco.
Enfermedades asociadas a mala alimentación.
Yeah, associated illnesses and poor nutrition, the same.
En Cuba surgió la idea de producir orgánico porque no había alternativa, por necesidad.
In Cuba, organic agriculture flourished because there was no alternative.
Ustedes tienen que lograrlo por conciencia y que la gente vea en eso un buen negocio.
You have to adopt it out of conscience and because it's good business.
En Cuba tenemos un mensaje. Estamos de acuerdo que el químico es malo para el cuerpo.
We have a message in Cuba where we're all aware and we agree that chemicals are bad for your body.
¿Alguien lo duda?
Anybody wonder? Anybody question that?
Bueno, dice Kama Sutra.
The Kama Sutra. Even the Kama Sutra.
Que lo que es malo para el cuerpo es malo para el sexo.
What a philosopher. Whatever's bad for the body is bad for sex.
I've got quite a few questions. There are a few people here that have had their hands up for a while. Just one will go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll go to this. Maybe we'll just focus on this side and then go to this side after. So.
Thank you. I would like to share with you that my parents were huge supporters and sympathizers and followed the movement and discussed it at the dinner table with their friends and family. And there is a background here of cooperatives. Mostly it's out west. You have a country that owned the land, and here, whenever we look at some kind of national energy or national water or national food policy, it's set up to sell it off to the highest bidder. So short of coming at it from the very small collective community gardens, you mentioned that you are looking to strengthen your own cooperative systems, and we would very much like to know more about that. Because here, cooperatives are on a hit list, along with ecologically sensitive areas, historical areas, anything that's profitable to sell to the highest bidder is gone. So we need some security here. It's not as simple as learning to grow food.
que no es tan simple aquí como cultivar comida y hacerlo. Aquí tenemos muchas. And this is a common theme. Dice que si tienen sugerencias.
Creo que la sociedad actual está diseñada para el egoísmo.
Society is designed here for egoísmo, is for greed.
Desde niño.
From childhood.
Batman, Superman, Hombre Araña. Ninguno trabaja en cooperativa.
None of those guys work co-op. Well, he doesn't know about the Justice League. They only work together for the corporations, let's just say.
Mira, el cooperativismo, yo soy un fanático del cooperativismo.
I'm a fanatic about cooperation.
Creo que tiene que ver mucho con el cristianismo.
Has to do much with Christianity for me.
Hay modelos por ahí de cooperativas como los kibú israelí, por ejemplo.
There's models like the Israeli kibbutzes,
que son una sociedad superior en ese tema.
Who at that level are a superior example.
Lamentablemente la vida los ha ido
Unfortunately,
dispersando.
Unfortunately, life has been removing them, has been getting rid of them.
Hay que crear una filosofía, un evangelio.
We have to create an evangelism philosophy.
Por ejemplo, yo estuve en Costa Rica visitando cooperativas.
I was in Costa Rica visiting cooperatives.
Y descubrí que en la secundaria, en la primaria, en los primeros años se le da una asignatura de cooperativismo a los niños en cooperativas. A los niños.
And I discovered that at an elementary, primary school level, they give them una
asignatura.
They give them a signature.
A los niños costarricenses.
A subject. They teach them about cooperatives in primary school.
El 30% de la sociedad de los trabajadores costarricenses están en cooperativas.
30% of Costa Rican society's workers are in cooperatives.
Hay cooperativas en Europa, cooperativas en Estados Unidos.
Lots of cooperatives in Europe, in the States.
Yo creo que la universidad debe hacer una cátedra de cooperativismo para ver por dónde nos vamos.
No, este año en Cuba empieza.
So, and they say that they think that the universities should really build cooperative programs to really teach this, and she says this is happening. This year they start on the first programs.
Porque la solución no va a ser espontánea.
Because the solution will not be spontaneous.
Es responsabilidad de las universidades.
It's the responsibility of the universities.
Buscar el camino.
To find the way.
De una agricultura, por ejemplo, de ciencia y no de músculo.
To create an agriculture of science and not muscle.
Y por supuesto garantizar que sean buenos negocios.
And of course help to guarantee that they are good businesses, stable businesses.
No puedo decir.
That's it.
So, in the interest of time, we're going to just take a few more questions after we go through this side. We'll ask that the questions are short and that the answers are relatively, we only have about 15 more minutes.
Colette? Una primero?
I'll be very short. We have a lot to learn from the Cuban experience, but we are in a situation of food insecurity in Canada and U.S. Because of the industrial agriculture is controlled by fossil fuel industry, the chemical industry. So we are in the situation actually food insecurity. So to break that bond, we have to concentrate on local food. That's what Cuba is doing, the food cooperative. If you create the local food, you can break the bondage of agri-food industry. The agri-food industry gives you that food. So,
agree.
Yeah. So Colette, did you have a question?
I just wanted to know how secure the seed.
Quiere saber cuán segura es la
Produce all of their own.
si está produciendo todas sus semillas o si está bien seguro el sistema de semilla.
No.
No, it's not very secure.
Podríamos hablar del tema.
Pero
no, pero te voy a explicar. Hoy en día hay un monopolio de la semilla de la semilla de vegetal.
It's a giant monopoly on vegetable seeds.
En Cuba se da bien el café, se da bien la caña y el tabaco.
We grow sugar, coffee, and tobacco very well in Cuba.
Pero reproducir col, coliflor, cebolla es imposible.
But to grow cabbage, cauliflower, onions, very difficult.
Por tanto, hay que comprar con algunas semillas del exterior.
And so we have to buy seeds in from outside of the country.
Y algunas otras semillas se producen, pero no como
Some other seeds are produced locally, but not with the greatest success.
Pero eso sería la globalización buena.
But that would be what we would consider an appropriate globalization, is the sharing of seeds.
Y de Norteamérica hay muchos comerciantes que quisieran cooperar con Cuba, vender, pero no hay.
And there are many merchants and seed merchants in the United States who would love to cooperate with Cuba, but we have the Helms-Burton law to thank for that, but it's not legal. They're not allowed to. ¿Y la compañía de semillas de Canadá?
Sí, de hecho estamos importando semillas.
So we import seed
Mercados más lejanos, por supuesto.
from farther away areas.
Canadá, China, Italia,
Canada, China,
Japón.
Italy, Japan.
Que el mercado natural sería Estados Unidos.
But the natural market where we would normally get them from would be the U.S., the closest.
One other question here, and then we'll go on to this side.
Yo escuchaba hablar, ustedes con las cooperativas, escuchaba hablar que hay diferentes tipos de cooperativas y que tienen diferentes niveles de autonomía con respecto al gobierno. No sé si ustedes podrán hablar más de cómo funcionan las cooperativas.
We've heard that there are different types of cooperatives and that some of them have different levels of autonomy and independence from the government. If you could just speak to that a bit, please.
La revolución le dio tierra en la reforma agraria a 150,000 campesinos.
The revolution gave land to 155,000 smallholders.
Que le dio la propiedad de la tierra.
It gave them the ownership of the land.
Después empezaron a hacer cooperativas.
After that, they started to form into cooperatives.
Una cooperativa de producción agropecuaria.
A producers cooperative.
CPA. Que quitaban la cerca y unían las tierras.
Which would get rid of all the fences and bring together the production.
Los que no unieron las tierras se unieron en una cooperativa de crédito y servicio.
So the ones who didn't bring together their lands came together in credit and service cooperatives.
La CCS, que era una cooperativa para crédito y maquinaria.
To help get machinery and credit.
Ahora hay unas UPPC, que son la tercera variante de cooperativa.
Third variety.
Que eran las tierras estatales que se entregaron en usufructo perpetuo gratuito.
And the third ones were given in a perennial, like always available. So in what do they call it? In
rotation.
In perpetuity, yeah. In perpetuity, yes. Thank you.
Eso es una locura.
And as long as they're being used, right?
Ahora la Asamblea Nacional de los Diputados va a hacer una ley de cooperativas para todas las cooperativas igual, porque había diferentes, como tú dices, diferentes maneras de interpretar.
And they have to pay for those lands. They pay in perpetuity, they have the right to it, but they pay the government a rent for those lands.
Podríamos agregar que donde único había cooperativas era en lo agropecuario, en la agricultura, no había en el resto. Ahora se está empezando a hacer en el resto.
Originally there were only producers co-ops, people coming together to grow together, but now we see more of the other co-ops.
So in the interest of time, we'll take 3 more questions. I didn't want to miss any really keen people here, because I'm looking this way. Is there anyone really keen here? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yes, I was, I believe one of the asked the question, but I believe it's a political answer, but I'm not sure that it is understandable within the few moments. But the system, I did explain, that the cooperatives, they are like semi-governments under the governments of the people, or how they are managing, because they are subsidizing to the farmers to grow food, and it's a bit cheaper, like a portion for farmers to good things. Like how they are, where they are getting the funds and how they are implementing that. They are not subsidizing to the people, but subsidizing to the going to.
Me está preguntando cómo es el subsidio, cómo viene el subsidio del gobierno al trabajador, como a la persona, y que lo entiende muy bien. So you want to understand better the cooperatives?
Yes.
And so there's a producer co-op, farmers coming together to work the land together. There are credit and service co-ops where they are buying co-ops essentially, where they buy their credits and their services together. So not farming together, but they access credit and services and fertilizers and things together. And then the last one are co-ops, which are renting land from the government of people coming together to grow food. ¿Y eso pueden vender de fuera del país? No?
Todavía.
Not yet. So that's the first part of the question. What was the last part, please, again?
They are subsidizing to the farmers.
Si los están subsidiando el gobierno a las cooperativas todavía.
Yo no me siento con mucha autoridad de explicarte, porque yo también tengo tus preocupaciones.
I have some of your concerns as well, and
Pero en la sociedad cubana hay un sistema de salud que es de los mejores de América Latina.
So in Cuba we have a health system, for example, that's one of the best in Latin America.
Hay un sistema de educación hasta el doctorado que es gratis, incluyendo los materiales.
There's a system, up to our doctorate level, it's free, including the materials you need.
Hay un sistema de seguridad social.
There's a system of social security
que cubre expectativas modestas de vida.
Which covers modest expectations for life.
Según las estadísticas de Naciones Unidas,
according to the United Nations statistics,
en América Latina el que más gasta en los hombres,
in Latin America, who most spends on their people and on their citizens is Brazil.
Después está Cuba.
And after that is Cuba.
Pero no está debidamente individualizado, para decirlo alguna vez.
But it's not.
O sea que tú no tienes noción de cómo eso se.
But we don't really know, like how we don't have real valuations on that.
Question with the yes.
Yes, I want to sort of bring it back to the lessons for Toronto in comparison. Marcella, you seem to be really impressed with the way, a holistic vision that you found in the way in which people were working across sectors, bringing people together that had different skills. And we have in Canada, in all of our attempts to change the food system, we're dealing with a fragmented way of thinking and silos in the government, so that we are, we have to deal with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Labor, the Ministry of Agri-Food, the Ministry of Environment, when they should be, in fact, working in concert. But we think in those fragments as well, which is, I think, one of the obstacles. So I'm curious, in Cuba, there is both more of an integration across those state structures, so that they're talking with each other, so that there's some kind of a holistic approach that is institutionalized, as well as a part of a way of thinking that's much more holistic.
Yeah, and there is a national food policy, that there is no national food policy.
So what would be your question?
No, the question is there,
So
are the state institutions that for us are like silos, are they working in an
I think the
integrated fashion?
solutions really fall at a neighborhood level or community level. So whatever the neighborhood or the community is, the success is within there. The example that Marcella spoke about, Espriel, all the young people coming together, they all went to school together, they were friends, all different disciplines, but they got together and they look at community challenges and community solutions. And so whether the community is within a housing project or it's within a cluster of immigrant population, And it's utilizing, I think, some existing organizations, whether it's a service club or church organization.
But the state, state
I'd like to
education
respond.
system, the state
He's
health
responded.
system.
Yeah. So he tells me that the state considers these issues of national security importance, right? So there is a top-down mandate from the state to implement the programs that you see happening. That there are some support groups, but primarily it's from the top down in the state, and that the people take it on, right? And that it's their job as citizens to do that.
But the ministries are working in.
Pero que los ministerios están trabajando en conjunto en general. Yes, they are.
But we don't
so it goes
It's
back
bizarre
to,
for us, I know.
Yeah, it
I
goes
work
back
in-
to a national food
Policy, yeah.
policy.
They also have a national official plan in Cuba, which I should discuss. And the national official plan essentially is that for all of the schools, all of the institutions, for many of the hotels, they basically are supply managing the product into those areas. Some comes from outside, but they have basically organized it so it's all orderly marketing, like the wheat board we've just had ripped apart in Canada, right? They have that in Cuba, and that's how they do it. So they're not farming, they're not doing these things in a speculative manner. They know who they're growing their food for.
But I think that we can engage, I mean, of course, we are not going to get it, well, maybe we will after this conference, to get a national food policy. But in the meantime, I guess there are different groups that are fighting against different things. And there is the health centers, the doctors got together when they wanted to establish this law that some refugees couldn't get health care. I'm sure there are members of the legal profession. So here, I don't know, this is my humble opinion, there could be a way of interacting at that level, because we can't wait until the top is going to do something about this. But to tap into these different groups. I mean, there are professionals who are dealing with this, but they are isolated. There is a group of doctors here, a group of lawyers here, the health center, the Board of Education, so maybe there has to be some commonality around that, and maybe that's what we can take after this conference, how to organize.
I think it's a great note to end on, because time passes, we are out of time, but I invite you, this is not the end of the conversation. We have Miguel Isis here.
So he would just like to make a final address,
Sure.
something he'd like to share.
And we have about 1 minute left.
Yo quería hablar de un elemento de factor de fuerza, de unión.
I'd like to speak of strength and power and of union.
Yo tenía
together.
Un tío, pastor evangélico.
I had an uncle who was an evangelical preacher.
Y decía que el cuerpo es templo del Espíritu Santo.
And he said that the body is the temple of the Santo Espíritu. Yeah.
Por eso hay que cuidar el cuerpo.
And that's why we have to take care of the body.
Y creo que la iglesia puede jugar un factor importante en el mensaje de unificación.
And I think that the churches could have a strong role of unification.
Para tener conciencia de lo que está pasando con la calidad de los alimentos.
In order to have a conscience of what's happening with regards to the quality of our foods.
No sé si es peor un cigarro que un McDonald's.
I don't know if the cigar is worse than a McDonald's burger.